inequality. It was 3 years after the financial crisis of 2008. The U.S. government had spent billions propping up Wall Street following the crash, but the people, the 99%, as they called themselves, had not recovered. On the first day of the movement, police and metal barricades blocked the protesters from Wall Street, but they found home at Zuccotti Park. The invasion lasted months and stretched beyond city limits to other cities across the nation and other countries following suit. It was a leaderless resistance movement, a true social movement by the people. And though the tents are packed up, the people have gone home, the movement lives on today. Now RT's Igor Piskunov is in New York as activists commemorate the anniversary.
We're marching from Zuccotti Park, the birthplace of Occupy Wall Street, to New York City Hall. Fewer activists than during the original Occupy Wall Street, but I can tell you the spirit is definitely still there. Throughout the day, during the 4th anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, various people, various activists and groups have been gathering in downtown Manhattan, voicing their views and fighting for their rights. Be it fighting against poverty, fighting for the rights of the homeless, or even for better roads. In New York City, I've seen those banners here in downtown Manhattan carried by some activists as well. Very heavy police presence has been seen as well, but things have been pretty peaceful. I was able to speak with one of the original organizers of Occupy Wall Street, and here's how he described the evolution of the movement.
I think that Occupy Wall Street is like the encampment is not here, but people have moved on and are in different parts of the country and the city. I'm working in labor unions. I'm director of organizing at a labor union. Other people are in different companies and started their own startups and doing different programs. So the whole idea of Occupy Wall Street is here, but people have dispersed and they're creating change under this banner of, income inequality and the 99% and the 1%.
Things have been pretty common. Like I said, there's been a very heavy police presence, but judging by the previous anniversaries, we know that things can change. Like the first anniversary 3 years ago, when we saw some really aggressive police action. 185 people were arrested back then, often for just walking on the sidewalk, like we are doing right now. In fact, just recently, a class lawsuit has been put forward against New York City, its former mayor Bloomberg, and several other authorities for violating the rights and democratic freedoms initially guaranteed by the Constitution. So it's not the last time that we'll be hearing about that. But so far, RT has been covering Occupy Wall Street since the very beginning, and of course we'll be monitoring how these events unfold during its 4th anniversary as well.
Well, Igor Piskunov giving us a look at what New York looks like today. But moving back 4 years, RT's Marina Portnaya gave us some perspective earlier on what it was like on the ground covering Occupy Wall Street 4 years ago.
Well, the environment, Igor, down here 3 years ago was completely different. It was very tense and it was very heated. There were hundreds of activists and protesters that were down here early in the morning. They were taking part in several rallies and protests, trying to shut down the streets around the New York Stock Exchange. And the police were very quick to arrest any protesters that fell out of line. If they stepped on the street, they would be arrested. If they made a move that the police didn't like, at certain times they would be arrested. It was very quick arrests. But then there was a point where we saw protesters who were walking on the sidewalk where they were allowed to walk. We were actually with them, videotaping them, that the police just started arresting them, knocking them down, using some pepper spray, and that speaks to the class action lawsuit that you spoke about being filed with the police not handling the citizens correctly, because every American is allowed to have freedom of expression. Every American is allowed to protest peacefully, and we saw hundreds of Americans, if not thousands, coming out into the street that day that you're talking about to protest income inequality, to speak out against bank bailouts and government corruption, and the 99% versus the 1%. These are legitimate issues that are still being spoken of today, you know, the growing gap between the rich and poor. And 3 years ago, when you saw Americans take to the streets to try to use their freedom of expression, nearly 200 people, as you mentioned, were arrested. And now there's a lawsuit that is looking into whether the police were justified in arresting those people.
Occupy Wall Street began here in Zuccotti Park, but actually I think it is fair to believe that it has evolved into a much wider, not so much movement, but issue now often being mentioned by top-level politicians during campaigning as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The complaints that have been voiced by the activists and the protesters in the Occupy movement has found its way into the political discourse. At the presidential level, we have now a Democratic candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders, who has earned the endorsement of some Occupy groups. This is the first time that founders from Occupy Wall Street have endorsed a politician, or yet let alone a presidential candidate. So you have somebody that is a self-proclaimed socialist, somebody that aligned himself with the Occupy movement from the very beginning, now becoming mainstream. So you see this this kind of fusion between all of the issues the Occupy movement and its supporters have been talking about for so many years, and a political candidate now getting their endorsement and running for the highest office in the United States.